Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
It's great to be here for this deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. So I want you to imagine you are at, a really lavish dinner party.
Okay, I'm there.
The wine is flowing, the food is incredible, there's music playing, and a good friend of yours leans over, clinks his glass against yours, and says, hey, I'm backing a massive new shipping venture tomorrow. Could you do me a solid and just co-sign on it? Just a formality.
Oh, boy.
Right. And you smile, you strike his hand in a firm handshake, and you don't think another thing of it. You just did a buddy a favor.
Which is a very normal human impulse.
Exactly. But what you don't know is that, well, if that ship sinks, the bank isn't just going to ding your credit score. Under the law of the land, they are going to take your house.
Yeah, they really are.
They are going to take the literal bed you are sleeping on. And if that doesn't cover the debt, they are going to take your children and sell them into slavery.
I mean, that was the brutal, unyielding reality of ancient credit.
It's insane to think about.
It really is. A single moment of social compliance, a single handshake, could literally cost you your entire bloodline.
And that is exactly the kind of life or death scenario we are diving into today. Because, well, usually when we approach an ancient religious text, there's this underlying expectation that we are going to be handed a rigid, dusty list of rules.
Right. A lot of people just expect a sterile assembly manual for a piece of furniture.
Exactly. Insert peg A into slot B. Don't steal, don't lie, eat your vegetables, and you're good.
Yeah, we really have a tendency to project our desire for a binary checklist onto ancient texts. It's basically a form of legalism.
Yes, it's easier that way, right?
Oh, absolutely. We like things to be easily categorized into allowed and not allowed. It takes the burden of critical thinking completely off of our shoulders.
But then you step into the world of Proverbs, specifically the first 9 chapters, which is our focus for today, and suddenly that simplistic assembly manual just gets thrown completely out the window.
It's a totally different landscape.
It really is. We're looking at a landscape that is far more nuanced, far more dangerous, and frankly, a lot more exciting. These 9 chapters operate as a unified preface to the rest of the book. It's an ethical handbook designed to guide a person through the incredibly dangerous, diverging paths of a complex life.
It's not just a collection of old sayings that belong on a decorative pillow,
Right. It's a completely different way of seeing reality.
It is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And we really have to understand that the writer's purpose in these first 9 chapters is strictly educational.
Okay.
If you compare this text to other ancient manuals, for instance, the Mishnah, which is the Jewish sayings of the fathers, you can really measure the difference.
So?
Well, Proverbs takes what the Greeks called paideia, which translates roughly to practical discipline, training, the everyday steering of your life.
Yeah.
And it elevates it into a profound spiritual pursuit.
So the mundane actually becomes holy.
Precisely. How you handle a business transaction or how you treat your neighbor isn't just sociology anymore, it's spirituality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand any of the specific granular advice in Proverbs, like how to handle your money, how to navigate relationships, or how to avoid being utterly ruined by a bad decision, we first have to understand its foundational premise.
The starting line.
The starting line, exactly. And the text doesn't bury the lead at all. It introduces its core wisdom right out of the gate in chapter 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge.
Yes, that is the alpha and the omega of the entire book.
It's that central.
Absolutely. If you don't grasp that, the rest of the book just reads like fortune cookie advice.
But here's where I have to push back immediately, or at least acknowledge a massive glaring obstacle for anyone listening to this in the modern world.
Okay, what's that?
When you use the word fear, well, to modern ears, that sounds like oppression.
Right.
It sounds like a toxic, abusive dynamic. I mean, people spend thousands of dollars on therapy to unlearn leading their lives by fear. So why on earth would a book that is ostensibly about living a beautiful, flourishing, joyful life start with the premise that you need to be cowering in terror?
It's a vital question. And frankly, if we misunderstand that word, we misunderstand the whole text. The commentaries we're drawing from address this beautifully.
What do they say?
They describe this specific kind of fear not as a tormenting terror. It is not the picture of a beaten slave cowering before a capricious, angry tyrant who might strike them down at any moment.
Okay, so what is it?
It is described as and I love this phrasing, the fear of the finite in the presence of the infinite.
Wait, the fear of the finite in the presence of the infinite. Break that down for me.
It is a profound, breathtaking reverence and awe. The text explicitly says this kind of fear is highly compatible with childlike love. Think about it in physical terms. Have you ever stood right at the very edge of the Grand Canyon, looking down into that massive, mile-deep abyss?
Oh, yeah. Or out in the middle of the desert, far away from city lights, just looking up into the deep cosmos.
Exactly. And what do you feel in those moments?
You feel this overwhelming sense of vertigo, like a kind of trembling.
Yes. You feel a sense of absolute smallness. You feel a trembling awe. But here's the key. It doesn't make you want to run away.
No, it draws you in.
Right. You are captivated by a reality that is so much larger, older, and more powerful than you are. That is the fear Proverbs is talking about. It is the realization that you are not the center of the universe.
So it's about right-sizing yourself.
Precisely. The actual obstacle for modern listeners isn't that God is a bully. The obstacle is our cultural obsession with being, as Proverbs 3.7 puts it, wise in our own eyes.
Oh, wow. Wise in our own eyes.
According to the text, the ultimate foolishness is the atheistic arrogance of believing that we, with our smartphones and our degrees, are the highest authority in the universe.
That human reason alone is enough.
Exactly. It's the assumption that human reason, completely unmoored from any divine reality or historical wisdom, is sufficient to navigate the complexities of life.
I really want to linger on that phrase, wise in our own eyes, because in the 21st century, this translates perfectly to a profound lack of intellectual humility.
It really does.
We see this everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Silicon Valley tech bro mentality that thinks every human problem, including death, can just be hacked with enough code.
Right.
Or the hustle culture guru who tells you that your own willpower is the only God you need. We cannot attain true wisdom if we start from a place of self-centered certainty.
You literally can't.
If you walk into a room assuming you are the smartest person there, you are biologically and psychologically incapable of learning anything new. You have to submit to a reality and a moral order that is simply larger than your own ego.
Matthew Henry's commentary hits on this exact psychological state. He points out that those who say to the Almighty, "Depart from us," are so far from fearing him that they actually set him at defiance.
They don't even care.
Right. They despise instruction because they genuinely don't think they need it. It's the ultimate Dunning-Kruger effect on a spiritual level.
The Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with limited knowledge overestimate their own competence.
Yes. The text says fools despise wisdom and instruction. They have no dread of a higher moral law. They feel no awe at the edge of the canyon, so they certainly won't give you any thanks for telling them how to align their lives with it.
Because they think they've already figured it all out.
Exactly.
It's interesting how often we do this in our own lives without even realizing it. We think we are being independent or strong-willed, but really we are just insulating ourselves from any truth that challenges our current comfort zone.
That's a great way to put it.
So how do we actually counteract that? If the prerequisite to all of this ancient wisdom is humility, how do we practically apply this fear of the infinite today?
Well, it starts with an audit.
Yeah. Think about your own life right now. Where are you currently leaning heavily on your own understanding? Is there a conflict at work where you are absolutely 100% certain that you are the victim and the other person is the villain?
That's a very common one.
Right. Or are you trusting your gut, your ego, or your narrow perspective on a major financial choice, rather than seeking out the broader established truths of people who have been there before?
The best way to audit that certainty is through intentional friction.
Intentional friction, what does that look like?
When you are making a major decision this week, whether it's about a career move, a relationship boundary, or an investment, intentionally seek out a perspective that challenges your default assumption.
So actively look for pushback.
Yes. Step out of being wise in your own eyes and invite the humbling, awe-inspiring realization that you might not have all the answers.
Okay, so let's say we've done that. Let's say we've cultivated that awe. We recognize we aren't the center of the universe and we are ready to learn. The natural next question is, well, how is this wisdom actually delivered to us? Right. If it's not just dropping out of the sky on golden tablets, where do we look for it?
We find it in the pedagogy of Proverbs.
Yeah.
And the text frames itself, first and foremost, as an intimate family conversation. It is King Solomon writing to his son, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction."
Okay.
But it immediately follows that up with an equally important command. And don't forsake your mother's teaching.
Now, I know we read right past that today because listen to your mom and dad is literally the most basic advice on the planet. But from a historical standpoint, isn't that actually a massive deal?
It is revolutionary. Our sources note the historical rarity of this phrasing. Among all the nations of the ancient world, only the Israelites and the Egyptians placed a son's reverence for his mother on the exact same level as reverence for his father.
Because it was a deeply patriarchal world, right?
Deeply patriarchal ancient Near East. Women were often treated as property, or at best, as secondary citizens whose primary value was childbearing.
But Proverbs completely rejects that hierarchy when it comes to moral authority.
Completely. The text promises that the instructions of both parents will be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck.
Wow.
The mother is not just a caretaker, she is a primary theologian and philosopher for the child. It elevates her moral authority to the exact same plane as the king himself.
It grounds the transmission of wisdom in the family unit, the most basic building block of society. It basically says that the first classroom of reality is your kitchen table.
Exactly.
But what I love is that the book doesn't stay trapped in the house. Once the foundation is laid at home, it moves outward. By verse 20 of the first chapter, wisdom is personified as a woman, and she is not whispering in a quiet, secluded sanctuary.
No, not at all.
The text says she is crying out aloud in the streets. She is raising her voice at the noisy city gates.
In the chief place of concourse, as some translations put it. And we really have to understand what the gates of an ancient city actually were.
They weren't just doors in a wall.
Far from it. The city gates were the absolute center of ancient life. They were the bustling marketplace, the open-air courthouse where elders settled disputes, the news hub where travelers brought stories from abroad.
Very busy.
It was loud, chaotic, and completely secular.
Then that's exactly where wisdom is hanging out.
Yes. Our commentary connects this vivid imagery to Socrates. Socrates famously said that the fields and the trees taught him nothing. If he wanted to find wisdom, he had to go to the agora, the bustling public square of Athens, and converse with people.
Wow, that's a perfect parallel.
Right. Both the Hebrew tradition and the Greek tradition agree on this fundamental point. True wisdom is not hidden in a remote, silent cave. It is not some esoteric secret reserved for monks meditating on a mountaintop.
That is such a vital course correction for the way we live today. Because we have this relentless tendency to look for secret hacks to a good life.
We really do.
We think wisdom is something we have to unlock behind a paywall. We buy exclusive online courses. We obsess over the hidden morning routines of billionaires. We want the esoteric diet knowledge that no one else has.
We act like the truth of a good life is a conspiracy we have to uncover.
Exactly. But this text is shouting, literally shouting, that the most profound wisdom is highly accessible. It is shouting at you through your daily interactions, through the consequences of your actions, and through the basic realities of human nature unfolding right in front of you.
It is the loud, obvious wisdom of reality. When you see a coworker ruin their reputation through constant gossiping, that is wisdom shouting in the public square.
Yeah.
When you see a friend destroy their health through unchecked stress, that is wisdom crying out.
But the tragedy described in the text is that people just walk right past her. Wisdom cries out, "How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity?" She stretches out her hand and no one pays attention.
And why do they ignore it? Because the noise of our own egos and our modern distractions drowns out the clear public broadcast of truth. We are too busy looking down at our screens to see the consequences playing out in the lives of the people around us.
It's tragic, really.
The commentaries note that this personification of wisdom pleading in the streets is a picture of the divine passionately desiring the reformation of humanity. It's not a distant God who has set a trap hoping you fail. It's a present, active reality begging you to align with it before you get hurt.
Think about your own daily routine. Are you ignoring the loud, obvious wisdom right in front of you? Are you neglecting your basic, mundane responsibilities to your family, your community, or your own physical health, while endlessly scrolling through self-improvement influencers looking for a magical shortcut?
Yeah. The wisdom you need to fix your life isn't hidden in Tibet.
Right. It's waiting for you at the grocery store, in traffic, and in the way you speak to your spouse. You just have to stop walking past it.
And that brings us to the specific things wisdom is warning us about as we walk through that chaotic public square. Because once we actually start listening to her shouting, we realize she has some very stark, very intense warnings about the traps hidden in plain sight.
Right. And the very first major threat she points out is the illusion of the fast track, the promise of easy money.
The oldest trap in the book.
In Proverbs chapter 1, the text warns about sinners who say, Let's lie in wait for blood. We'll all have one purse. We'll fill our houses with plunder.
Yeah,
Now, I have to be completely honest here. When I read that, my eyes glaze over a bit.
understandable.
Most people listening to this deep dive are not tempted to join a violent gang of highway robbers. I mean, I'm not tempted to put on a ski mask and lurk in an alleyway to jump a merchant. So how on earth is this extreme violent example relevant to a modern professional commuting to work on the subway?
It's a very fair pushback. If we read it purely literally, it seems like a warning only applicable to outlaws and bandits. But the expert analysis reveals the core psychological impulse being addressed here, which is universal.
What is it?
It's the get-rich-quick mentality. It is what one of our sources brilliantly calls the communism of risk and reward.
The communism of risk and reward. What does that actually mean?
These ancient highwaymen are saying, cast in your lot among us, let us all have one purse. They are pooling their resources to exploit others. They are promising easy, rapid wealth without the slow, steady, mundane labor of actually building value.
I see.
It is the temptation of predatory extraction. They want the harvest without planting the seed.
Okay, now that translates perfectly. This is the ancient version of a pump and dump crypto scheme.
Exactly.
It's the shady corporate accounting that artificially boosts this quarter's numbers to trigger an executive bonus, completely at the expense of the company's long-term survival and the employees' pensions. It's the multi-level marketing pitch that promises you'll be driving a luxury car in 6 months if you just exploit your social circle. It's literally any system where you are trying to extract wealth without creating any real value.
Precisely. The text says they are greedy for gain, but it warns that this greed takes away the life of its owners.
It destroys them.
The great trap of the fast track is believing you can enjoy the fruits of wickedness without cultivating the roots of character. Matthew Henry's commentary points out the bitter cosmic irony here. These men think they're laying wait for other people's blood, but really they're laying wait for their own.
The universe has a moral physics to it. Predatory extraction eventually destroys the predator.
Yes. They mistake a cheap, common illusion of wealth for what the text calls precious substance. Real substance takes time to build. Plunder is fast, but it vanishes just as quickly, and it takes your soul with it.
But there's another fascinating economic trap discussed here, which seems even more subtle and far more common than outright robbery.
What's that?
It's the trap of debt, or what the text calls suretyship. And this brings us right back to the scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. In Proverbs 6, it warns intensely about becoming surety or striking hands for a neighbor. Walk me through the historical context here, because the language is absolutely dire. Why such a terrifying warning about essentially co-signing a loan?
To really understand the panic in the author's voice here, we have to look at the massive geopolitical shift happening during King Solomon's reign.
Okay.
Historically, Israel had been a largely agrarian society. Farmers, shepherds, local markets. But under Solomon, Israel was rapidly expanding and increasingly interacting with Phoenician commerce, the famous merchants of Tyre, the legendary ships of Tarshish.
So they are entering the global economy of the ancient world.
Exactly. And with that global economy came a new, highly sophisticated international credit system. Maritime trade was incredibly lucrative, but it was also incredibly risky. Ships sank, pirates attacked, cargo spoiled, so merchants needed backers.
And that's where striking hands comes in.
Yes. Striking hands was the physical gesture, much like a modern handshake, used to formalize a contract or co-sign a loan.
It just sounds so casual.
It was dangerously casual. You're at a banquet, the wine is flowing, your friend pitches you on his brilliant new mercantile voyage to bring back ivory and peacocks. He asks you to back him, you strike hands, and you think nothing of it. It feels like doing a favor. It feels like being a supportive friend. But the ancient Jewish law of debt, mixed with these new commercial realities, was uncompromisingly brutal. If your friend's ship sank in a storm off the coast of Cyprus, or if he just decided to take the money and run, the creditor didn't just write it off as a bad investment.
Right.
The creditor came for you. And we aren't just talking about a ding on your credit score or declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You could lose your ancestral land, which meant losing your family's identity and means of survival. The creditor could legally take the very bed you slept on.
That's terrifying.
Your garments could be torn from your back. And in the worst cases, as allowed by ancient law, you and your children could be forcibly sold into debt slavery to pay off the obligation.
That is just total annihilation of your life based on one handshake.
It was total annihilation. And so the advice the text gives is accordingly extreme. It doesn't say, well, be careful and read the fine print. It says, if you have done this, give no sleep to your eyes. Do not go to bed tonight. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler.
That imagery of the hunted gazelle is so visceral. It implies you are literally prey.
You are.
Let's translate that with some discernment for today, because obviously the specific ancient laws of debt slavery don't apply to us in the same way. The bank isn't going to sell my kids to a Phoenician merchant if I default on my mortgage.
Thankfully.
Right. But the enduring wisdom here is about the profound psychological and practical danger of over-leveraging yourself. It's about the absolute foolishness of giving up your future freedom for someone else's unpredictable behavior.
Exactly. Financial entanglement is a very real form of bondage. When you co-sign a bad auto loan for a relative who hasn't proven they can hold a job, or when you take on massive high-interest consumer credit card debt to fund a lifestyle you haven't actually earned, you are striking hands with a system that has zero mercy.
You become the hunted gazelle.
You really do. The stress of that debt stalks you. The text is urging an almost violent, panicked reaction against this kind of complacency.
So think about your own financial life right now. Are you currently entangled in a toxic financial obligation, a predatory loan, a bad co-signing situation where you are on the hook for someone else's bad decisions?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. But the wisdom of Proverbs says, swallow your pride, humble yourself, go to that person and do whatever it takes to aggressively get out of it now. Don't wait for the ship to sink. Don't even sleep until you start fixing it. Break the snare before it closes around your leg.
That urgency is a hallmark of these chapters. The author is pleading with the reader because the threats aren't just financial. While the desire for quick, unearned money is one major way we are lured off the path of wisdom, the other major threat is even more seductive.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
It is the lure of forbidden pleasure. And this brings us to one of the most vivid, detailed, and dramatic metaphors in the entire book.
Yes. If chapters 1 through 4 lay the groundwork, chapters 5, 7, and 9 are absolutely dominated by this intense imagery of two rival women, Lady Wisdom versus the siren song of folly.
It's quite a contrast.
Chapter 9 actually presents us with two competing feasts. Lady Wisdom has built this magnificent house with 7 pillars, which in ancient numerology represents completeness and perfection. She has prepared her meat, she has mixed her wine, and she sends out her maids to invite the simple to come, eat, and actually live.
A beautiful image.
But right across the street, Folly personified as a loud, foolish woman mimics this exact setup. She sits in the high places of the city, calling out to the exact same people, but she is offering stolen waters and bread eaten in secret.
To really grasp the impact of this, we have to look closely at the historical context of the strange woman or the adulteress who personifies folly, particularly the incredibly detailed narrative in chapter 7.
I have the background there.
Historically, this term strange woman often referred to a foreigner, someone outside the covenant of Israel, who perhaps still held on to pagan practices and looser moral codes.
Yeah.
The text paints a highly cinematic picture. It describes a young man, specifically noting he is void of understanding, wandering near her corner in the twilight, right as it's getting dark. She comes out to meet him, dressed as a harlot, and she uses a brilliant, manipulative pretense. She says she has a religious peace offering at her house.
Wait, a peace offering, like an animal sacrifice at the temple. How does that work into a seduction?
Yes, exactly. In the Levitical law, a peace offering was a sacrifice made at the temple to express gratitude to God. But the law stipulated that the meat of the peace offering had to be eaten on the exact same day it was offered. It couldn't be saved.
Ah, so she has a fridge full of premium steak that is going to go bad by midnight.
That's exactly it. So she uses this strict religious obligation as an excuse to throw a lavish feast. She says, I have peace offerings with me. This day have I paid my vows. Therefore, I came forth to meet you.
Wow.
It's a terrifyingly brilliant manipulation. She wraps her illicit seduction in the respectable cloak of religious observance. She makes the sin look like a pious duty.
That is wild.
And then she employs total sensory overload. She tells him she has decked her bed with coverings of tapestry, specifically carved works and fine Egyptian linen, and she has perfumed her bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon.
Okay, pause. Cinnamon. Today, cinnamon is just a dusty powder sitting in the back of my spice rack that I use for oatmeal, but back then, I'm assuming it wasn't cheap.
It was astronomically expensive. Back then, cinnamon was a highly prized luxury item imported by Phoenician traders all the way from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka.
That's a long journey.
It had to cross oceans and deserts to get to Jerusalem. It represents the absolute height of exotic, intoxicating indulgence. She is offering this young man a complete sensory escape from the mundane, boring reality of his everyday life.
Yeah, he's falling for it.
Hook, line, and sinker. And to seal the deal, she assures him there is zero risk. She says her husband has gone on a long journey, he's taken a bag of money, and he won't be back until the full moon. There are no consequences. It's the perfect crime.
No, I have to pause here again because we need to talk about how modern listeners might receive this. Especially reading through the lens of the 21st century, the intense, almost relentless focus on the adulterous woman as the source of all ruin can feel very uncomfortable.
Yes, again.
It can feel sexist. It can feel like it's leaning heavily on tired patriarchal tropes of the wicked temptress ruining the innocent, helpless man.
That is a very important point of discernment, and it's an obstacle we have to navigate carefully. We have to separate the enduring truth of the metaphor from the ancient patriarchal framing of the authors. The text was written by men to young men in a specific cultural moment where men held the economic and social power.
Right.
However, if we look deeper, the strange woman operates perfectly as a psychological archetype. She is folly itself. She represents any sensual obsession, any addiction, any destructive coping mechanism that promises immediate relief and intense pleasure while intentionally hiding the hook.
So it's broader than just a literal affair.
Much broader.
Yeah.
It could be a literal affair, yes. But it could also be pornography, substance abuse, gambling, or even the endless algorithmic dopamine loop of our smartphones. Anything that hijacks your senses and promises an escape without consequences.
The core mechanism of folly is summarized perfectly in what she says in Chapter 9. Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. What is the appeal there? It's the psychological thrill of the taboo.
The forbidden nature of it.
Exactly. The fact that it is forbidden is what makes it intoxicating. Our modern culture is an absolute master at weaponizing this exact psychology. We constantly market illicit, secret, or instantly gratifying pleasures as the ultimate expression of personal freedom.
We really do.
The overarching message of modern advertising is basically break the rules, indulge yourself, escape your boring life, you deserve it.
But the text violently punctures that marketing campaign. It strips away the fine Egyptian linen, it blows away the smell of the Ceylon cinnamon, and it bluntly states the brutal, terrifying reality of the aftermath.
Choose.
After indulging, it says of the victim, he doesn't know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol.
Sheol, the Hebrew shadow world of the dead. It's not a fiery hell, it's just emptiness.
Yes, the text compares the young man following his urges to an ox going blindly to the slaughter, or a bird rushing into a snare, completely unaware that it will cost him his life. Matthew Henry's commentary is chilling here. He describes it as a zombie existence.
A zombie existence.
You are dead while still breathing. Addiction, unchecked lust, and obsession hollows you out from the inside. The text describes the physical and social rot that follows. You lose your honor, your wealth is drained to strangers, your physical body actually decays, and you are left at the end of your life with the bitter, agonizing remorse of saying, "How have I hated instruction? Why didn't I listen?"
Wow.
The sweetness of the stolen water turns as bitter as wormwood in your stomach.
It's the ultimate bait and switch. So the question we all have to ask ourselves is, well, what stolen waters are you currently romanticizing in your life? What secret habits, hidden indulgences, or destructive coping mechanisms are you telling yourself are completely harmless?
We all have blind spots.
What are you telling yourself is just a little secret thrill that you have completely under control?
The practice to counter this powerful illusion comes from Proverbs 4.26. Ponder the path of your feet. Folly survives on impulsivity. It survives on sensory overload and the promise of now. Wisdom survives on pausing and extrapolating. Yes. Before you take the first step toward that temptation, take the action to its logical, bitter conclusion. Imagine the literal aftermath. The devastating loss of trust in your marriage, the financial drain of the addiction, the physical toll on your liver or your brain chemistry, the hollow spiritual emptiness. You have to train yourself to look past the bait and see the snare.
That is so incredibly powerful. Ponder the path of your feet. Play the tape all the way to the end.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. If giving into folly destroys us from the outside in, whether it's an external scam or an external temptation, the natural next question is, how do we protect ourselves from the inside out?
Right. How do we fortify ourselves?
How do we build internal defenses so we aren't constantly vulnerable to these traps? We have to look at our daily habits. We have to look at the anatomy of ruin.
And there is no more famous habit check in all of Proverbs than the brilliant analogy of the ant and the sluggard in chapter 6.
Oh, I love this one.
Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. The commentary notes the specific brilliance of the ant's work ethic. She has no chief, no overseer, no micromanaging boss breathing down her neck, yet she gathers her food in the harvest. She is entirely self-motivated by the harsh reality of the coming winter.
While the sluggard, on the other hand, says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. I always compare this to hitting the snooze button on life.
That's a perfect analogy.
And I don't just mean literally sleeping in. It's the entropy of minor concessions. When you hit snooze, or when you decide to skip the gym, or when you put off having that hard conversation with your spouse for another day, you aren't making a dramatic, evil decision to ruin your life. You aren't joining a gang of highway robbers.
No, you're just asking for 5 more minutes of comfort.
Right.
But the text says that this habit, this relentless string of micro-capitulations to comfort, invites poverty to come upon you like a robber and your scarcity like an armed man. It sneaks up on you and then it overwhelms you. Ruin doesn't always come from a dramatic explosion of vice. Very often ruin is just a slow leak in the tire.
It's the death of 1,000 cuts. Sloth is a passive failure. But the text immediately pivots from the passive sluggard to an active failure, introducing a really fascinating, sinister character known as the man of Belial, or a worthless person.
Yeah, this is a very interesting shift.
And the description of how this person operates is so strange. It says he winks with his eyes, he signals with his feet, he motions with his fingers. What on earth does that mean? Was there some sort of ancient sign language?
It's a great question. You have to imagine the setting again, an ancient, crowded bazaar or a noisy city gate. 2 merchants or con men are colluding to rip off a foreigner or a naive buyer. They don't speak out loud because they would be overheard, so they communicate through deceitful micro-expressions. One winks, the other taps his foot to signal that the rigged scales are in place. They point with their fingers to distract.
Oh, I see. It's exactly like a card counter at a blackjack table, or a street hustler running a 3-card Monte game. It's the mechanics of hidden deceit.
Precisely. He is constantly engaging in subtle, deceitful communication to manipulate people for his own gain. And this act of deception leads directly into one of the most famous passages in the book, the list of the 7 things God explicitly hates.
Yes, let's look at that list, because I think it is incredibly revealing about the moral priorities of Proverbs. We tend to think God hates, drinking or dancing. But the text says God hates arrogant eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are swift in running to mischief, a false witness who utters lies, and finally, he who sows discord among brothers.
When you connect the dots on that specific list, what is the unifying theme? What do you see?
Well, they are all interpersonal. It's all about how you treat other people.
Exactly. God hates these specific things because they are community destroyers. Pride, lying, violence, and sowing discord, these are the absolute antithesis of the social fabric that wisdom is trying to weave.
It tears everything apart.
Right. A community, a business, or a family simply cannot survive if its members are constantly undermining each other with deceit, arrogance, and hidden agendas. The winking eye destroys the invisible web of trust that holds human society together.
So if the external world is full of these traps, and our own internal tendencies lean toward laziness and deceit, how do we prevent ourselves from becoming the sluggard or the sower of discord? How do we maintain our integrity?
It comes down to one core practice.
The core practice is found in Proverbs 4.23, which honestly might be one of the most important verses in the entire book. It says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life."
That word keep is profound. In the ancient Near Eastern context, as our sources point out, water was life. An eastern well or a fountain in a desert climate had to be strictly, violently guarded.
Because it was so precious.
Yes. If an enemy, or even just a careless traveler, tossed a dead animal into the well and poisoned the water, the entire community, the flocks, everyone would die.
Oh, wow.
The text is using that life or death imagery. It is saying, your heart, your inner life, your mind, that is your well. Out of it flow all the issues, the actions, the words, and the decisions of your life. If you let the well get poisoned with arrogance, lust, greed, or bitterness, everything you do will be tainted.
Keep your heart with all diligence, or as some translations say, above all keepings. In our modern application, this translates directly to the ruthless curation of your inputs. You have to be violently protective of what you allow to take root in your mind.
Absolutely.
Think about your daily habits right now. What media are you consuming? What group chats are you participating in? What subtle, cynical narratives are you letting the culture whisper into your ear?
We let so much garbage in without thinking.
We do. If you are constantly doom scrolling, consuming algorithmically generated media that is specifically designed to feed your outrage, your envy, or your political tribalism, you are willfully dumping poison into your own well. You cannot consume a diet of toxic outrage for 4 hours a day and then expect to speak to your spouse with patience and wisdom. You have to guard the gates of your mind like a soldier guarding a city's water supply.
And that extreme vigilance is required because the stakes are so incredibly high. Which naturally leads us to ask the biggest question of all.
Right.
Why? Why does keeping all these rules matter so much?
Yeah.
Why guard the heart? Is God just an arbitrary rule maker sitting in the sky, testing us for his own amusement to see if we'll jump through his hoops?
I think a lot of people feel that way.
They do. But the climax of these first 9 chapters answers that question, and it completely shifts the paradigm. It takes us from the gritty, practical reality of the city streets and the bazaar, all the way out to the origins of the universe itself.
Yes. This is where my mind was completely blown. This is the cosmic scale. This is where we learn that wisdom isn't just a list of good ideas for how to be a nice person. Wisdom is actually the literal architect of reality.
It's massive.
In Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom speaks in the first person again, but she is no longer just shouting in the market about avoiding bad loans and adulterers. She is declaring her eternal cosmic origins. She says, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his work, before his deeds of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, before the earth existed."
It is a breathtaking, sweeping passage of poetry. Wisdom declares that when God established the heavens, when he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundaries so the waters wouldn't overstep his command, she was there.
She was there.
She says she was there as the craftsman or the master architect by his side. The expert commentary synthesizes this beautifully. Wisdom here is being described as the logos, the divine logic and rational structure of creation. The physical universe isn't just a random collision of atoms. It is built on a foundation of profound moral and physical order.
The text actually calls wisdom a tree of life back in chapter 3. And the sources note that the symbol, the tree of life, isn't just an exclusive Hebrew concept.
Right, it's everywhere.
It's found in ancient Assyrian, Egyptian, and Persian religious imagery. It shows this broad, universal human longing for immortality, for a divine connection, for something that transcends the brutal reality of death. But in Proverbs, the tree of life isn't some magical, mythical plant you have to find on a heroic quest. It is accessible right now to anyone through moral and spiritual alignment with truth.
That's the crucial connection. Because wisdom was the blueprint used to build the physical universe, the moral laws of wisdom are just as deeply woven into the fabric of reality as the physical laws.
Okay.
The commentaries note the massive historical and theological weight of this specific text. For instance, early Christian thinkers, most notably Athanasius, argued fiercely over the translation of the word possessed versus created in verse 22 during what was known as the Arian controversy.
Wait, hold on. Athanasius, the Arian controversy. I need you to explain that to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Because why on earth does one single Hebrew word in an ancient poem start a massive historical debate, and how does that actually affect me today?
It's a great catch, and it matters immensely. Let's break it down. In the early centuries of the church, a leader named Arius argued that if God created wisdom's beginning of time, it meant there was a time before wisdom existed.
Okay.
It meant wisdom, which Christians identified with Christ. The Logos was just a really impressive creation, a subordinate creature.
Right.
But Athanasius and others argued that the word meant possessed. They argued that God has always possessed wisdom. Wisdom is co-eternal with God. If God didn't always possess wisdom, it would mean there was a time when God was utterly devoid of reason and logic.
Oh, wow. So if wisdom is created, it's just a tool. But if God always possessed it, then wisdom is the very nature and logic of God himself. It is the eternal blueprint.
Exactly. And that changes everything about how we view the rules of Proverbs. Practically speaking, the message is that God's moral laws are not arbitrary constraints imposed on a chaotic world by a grumpy deity. They are the actual operating code of the world itself.
I love the analogy of physics here. It's the absolute best modern translation for this ancient theological concept.
Yeah.
Living wisely isn't just about avoiding a scolding from a principal. It's about aligning yourself with the physics of reality.
Yes.
Think about gravity. If you walk off the roof of a 10-story building, gravity doesn't pull you down and crush you on the pavement because it is angry with you. Gravity doesn't have emotions.
Right.
The universe isn't mad at you. You suffer catastrophic consequences simply because you violated a fundamental structural law of the physical universe.
Precisely. And Proverbs is arguing forcefully that the moral universe operates with the exact same inevitability as the physical universe. If you build your life on greed, if you build your business on deceit, if you build your marriage on unchecked lust, you will fracture.
You will hit the pavement.
You will hit the pavement. And it's not because God is sitting on a cloud throwing lightning bolts at you in a fit of rage, but because you are trying to operate a complex machine contrary to its fundamental design. As wisdom says bluntly at the end of chapter 8, "He who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death."
It's not a threat.
It's not a threat, it's a statement of cause and effect.
So as you go through your week, try to radically shift your perspective on what these ancient rules actually are. Stop seeing morality as a restrictive, boring list of thou shalt nots designed to keep you from having fun. See it as the owner's manual for the human soul, written by the master architect of the cosmos.
That's a beautiful way to see it.
When you follow it, when you practice humility, when you avoid predatory debt, when you flee from destructive addictions, when you guard your mental well, you aren't just being a good boy or a good girl. You are operating in harmony with the actual grain of the universe. Your life functions more smoothly because you are finally using the equipment the way the manufacturer intended.
And that alignment brings an incredible deep-seated sense of peace. The text promises, when you walk, your steps will not be hampered. When you run, you will not stumble. There is a profound structural security in living a life aligned with the foundational logic of creation.
Yeah.
The anxiety of the fast track and the paranoia of the man of Belial just vanish.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. We've talked extensively about the strict discipline, the terrifying warnings about debt and adultery, the intense habit checking of the ant, and the cold mechanics of reality. It can sound very heavy.
It can.
But look closely at the very end of Proverbs 8. Wisdom says that during the creation of the world, when the foundations of the earth were being laid, she was always rejoicing before him, rejoicing in his whole world. My delight was with the sons of men.
My delight was with the sons of men. That is a stunning phrase. Before we even existed, before the first human took a breath, the divine logic of the universe was anticipating humanity with absolute joy.
Exactly. And that changes the whole tone of the book. If wisdom was rejoicing in the inhabited world, delighting in the human race from the very beginning of time, then our pursuit of a wise life isn't just a grim, heavy, joyless duty. It's not just a desperate attempt to avoid disaster and keep our heads down.
No.
It is a return to our original intended state of joy. When we seek wisdom, when we do the hard work of guarding our hearts and aligning our habits, we are stepping back into the delight that the architect of the universe has always had for us.
I love that.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.